One of my earliest memories is of death. I clearly remember being lifted up and being forced to look into a casket. I do not know who was in it or what they looked like. When I lived with Mrs. Green, there was a next door neighbor, Mr. Salcia. I will never forget his name or how he said, "Do you want to see me shed my skin?" I was about 3 when I first watched him ejaculate into a milk carton. I tried to take my own life for the first time at the age of 4. By the time I turned 5, I had stole, lied, gotten drunk, and tried to electrocute myself. At the age of 7, I tried again with a bottle of Bear aspirin. Before I turned 9, I had been removed from another home, had a trial adoption that ended with me getting expelled from kindergarten, and sent to another home where I was told if this one did not work out, I would go to juvenile hall. Within 3 months, I had cussed out the teacher they had gave me for 3rd grade. And instead of being expelled, they put me in a classroom by myself. I was told at age 10 by Joyce, the woman who had me, that I was left on someone's doorstep at the age of 14 months old, and no one had any information on me. And the building that had any information had burned down, which she told me after our trip to New York to see if she could find out any information, or so she claimed. The story changed many times over the years. But I believed that death followed me. In 1974, I met Lori. She was my best friend from church. When I was a teen, we looked a lot alike. But my mother, or Joyce, would not let me hang out with her outside of church. Much, every now and then. One day, her mother was using ammonia and bleach on her kitchen floor, and I was told that the gas from the gas stove caused the house to explode. Her mother died instantly, and Lori had 3rd-degree burns over half of her body. She did not survive. Unfortunately, not before having skin grafts done. I couldn't stay long. When I got to go see her, they kept her sedated, but not enough for me to not hear her scream. I can still hear those screams. When my mom told me she died, I did not understand. She did not explain what death was. Then, in my early 20s, there was Bunny. She was my best friend of our married group. There were 8 of us. Our common thread was our husbands had been best friends growing up. Bunny was married to Monroe. Almost every week or every other week, we got together and did something. Somehow, Monroe ended up using crack cocaine and got Bunny on it also. Not long after, Monroe was killed one night trying to rob someone, and I watched Bunny go from 160 pounds to 98 as she smoked herself to death. In 1993, at the age of 28, I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because I thought it was a place that I could go and drink and nobody would know about it. I made many acquaintances and made lots of friends. The very first friend who I will always remember is Robin. She had 18 months clean when I met her. She was the second person I knew that had actually did crack cocaine. So when I met Robin and she had stopped using, she was able to explain to me what had happened to my friend Bunny. About a year later, Robin had decided to get the lap band surgery. It was still kind of new then, but she was over 300 pounds, and she was so afraid that she would die if she didn't lose the weight. Unfortunately, she developed an infection around her staples, and she ended up dying anyway. In 1995, I was living in Los Angeles, California, and had an AA sponsor by the name of Diane. She was awesome, and she was married to Curtis. They were considered the couple. You know, he sponsored a lot of men, and she had a lot of women that she worked with, and everyone thought they had it all together. Everyone except those of us that she worked with. Her husband had hit on me when I first moved to Los Angeles, before I knew who he was. And once she found out, she got very protective of me and took me under her wing. He was abusive to her. He followed her, and she feared for her life. She started making plans to leave him, and she made sure that none of us changed our behavior so that he would not know. There was a small group of us that she would meet with every day, and we would end the evening meeting with the meeting at 3801. Not long after she left him, one night while she was taking me home, she said that she was really scared. She thought he had been following her, but wanted to believe that she was just being paranoid. She promised to call the police if she needed to. I did not hear from her one morning, and she was not at the morning meeting we had planned to meet at. It was Sunday, July 30th, 1995. It seemed odd that morning. I had a sinking feeling and soon started hearing rumors that a disgruntled husband had shot and killed his wife earlier. I tried to call Diane, but got no answer. When several of the men could not reach Curtis, we all knew what had happened. And it was confirmed later that day when we all had learned that Curtis had gone through with his threat and shot Diane as she parked her car. He had followed her into the garage and parked his car behind hers, blocking her in. After Diane turned off her engine, Curtis walked up to her window and shot her twice in the head before he fired one shot into his own head. I could not stop shaking for a long time. I was in Diane's car so many times. Was he always following us? I stopped going to meetings. I took a drink. I hit such a low in my life. I couldn't take care of my kids, and they went to stay with my ex and mom. I attempted suicide so many times. The Kaiser Mental Health started giving me the same room when they admitted me. I had turned blue a few times by the time I was found, from what I was told. And can you believe I felt such a failure? Because it seemed I couldn't even kill myself. One day I sat in my apartment and wrote goodbye letters to each of my children, walked them to the mailbox, went back and swallowed a whole bottle of sleeping pills that should have knocked out an elephant. And I went to bed. I woke up the next morning feeling like I had had the best sleep in my life. I had a severe asthma attack in 1998, and my doctor said that I needed to get out of Southern California. and suggested that I move. My sponsor at this time was Yvonne. She was about 5'9", had cocoa brown skin, long brown hair that she wore straight, was a singer, wrote children's books, and she rode a motorcycle. I believe it was a Harley, but I'm not positive. Yvonne seemed to be at peace with everything, and she genuinely cared for others. She talked about God like she actually knew him. She never put down how I felt about God. I was very angry and I hated God with a passion. Yvonne understood how I felt and told me that it was okay to have these feelings and not everything was my fault. In 1999, right after I moved to Las Vegas, Yvonne, while on a motorcycle ride that she did every year, died when her bike hit black ice. My mother Joyce passed in 2001, and I celebrated. I was so glad to see her dead. Shortly after, I found out through the paperwork I was left along with my piano that she knew more about my birth family than she let on. I found out that I was born in Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, New York, under the name of Female Sadler. This was not as bad as finding out that the birth certificate she gave me when I went to get my first job was a fake. It was worse because apparently the so called adoption she said she did was never finalized. I tried contacting the lawyer on the paperwork, but the number had been disconnected and I could not find another phone number. Ultimately, I became obsessed with finding my parents and wanting to learn who I was. Between 2002 and 2013, my friends Greg, who was also known as Dr. Death, Tawan, and John C. all passed from illnesses. I was back in the hospital in August of 2013. I was having chest pains again. I was having another heart attack. When Ricky was finally allowed in my recovery room, he informed me that Decrescia, a friend of ours, after we left to come to the hospital, after his set at the cellar, also had had a heart attack and died earlier in the day. Since I had just had my own heart attack, it took me a while to comprehend what he was saying. Decrescia was a bass player also, and they played together a lot. He was the boyfriend of Pam E., a singer and friend of ours. I was devastated. How is it that we both have heart attacks? And I was the one that survived. He was way healthier than me. It did not seem fair. At the beginning of September in 2013, my friend Deborah went in for a routine hernia repair and did not survive the surgery. I had known Deb since I moved to Las Vegas in 1999. Greg Bocata and Steve also died. I don't think they had illnesses. I believe it was out of the blue. I can't remember. I had tried dating a friend, and that was Bernard, and that did not work. He got possessive very quickly. He had gave me a ride home from a meeting one day and asked me out. After our first date, the next day when I was leaving work, Bernard was sitting in the employee smoking section by the parking lot. I told Robin, who was my ride, I would call her later. As he was taking me home, I explained that he just could not show up at my job. He said he understood. We dated for about a month until once again he showed up unexpectedly at my job. I had been avoiding him. The third date, he presented me with an expensive pendant before we met my son and his girlfriend, Nicole, for dinner at PF Chang's, where he tried to impress them with material items like his new Cadillac that had only so many models made and his 4 bedroom house. He did not understand that money and material things did not impress me. The last time we went out, he tried to hypnotize me. I still laugh at that today. He actually pulled out a pendant and tried to hypnotize me. Even said the "you are getting sleepy" part. I could not believe he was actually trying that. I let him continue. When he said the "when I get to zero, you will be totally relaxed," or however he said it, I looked at him and said, "Are you serious?" When he took me home that day, he said he would pick me up the next day after work. I told him I was going out with Robin and I wouldn't be available to see him. The next thing I remember was being hit across my face while he was driving, so it took me a moment to comprehend what had happened. Then, once again, the next day, he was sitting outside in the employee smoking section. But instead of going out the back door to ride home with Robin, I went out the front door and walked down the street to where I used to work. Robin met me in the parking lot there. I had told her what had happened. The night before, she had helped me move out of my apartment and into hers until I could decide what to do. In August of 2014, Bernard died. 2015 did not start off the way that Ricky and I was hoping for. On the 4th of January, I found myself posting to Facebook asking for emergency prayer for Ricky because we were at the ER for pain in his stomach. He had had it for 4 days in a row. And they were talking about keeping him because of his heart. They were running tests, and for 1.5 years, Ricky sat and waited and visited and watched me be in pain in the hospital over 16 times. I could not understand how it affected him. Now, when I had to sit and wait and watch while he was in pain, I've been yelled at out of his frustration. I have imagined the worst in my life in my head. My anxiety level is off the charts, but I kept talking to God to stay centered because I couldn't afford to go into the hospital myself. Ricky believed in God. So because of him, like proxy, I believed in his God. The feeling of helplessness shows just how much I have no power to change things. When I was going in and out the hospital, he told me he was afraid I was going to die. And now I knew that feeling. My emotions were all over the place, up and down, happy and sad, and I already talked to myself and answered myself. But now I was starting to interrupt my own conversations with myself while I sat there and waited. Hey, Paulo, hold on, boo boo. They scheduled him for surgery on the 11th. It took 4 hours. They had to go in and repair his gallbladder, and the ducts were where it emptied had sealed shut, and it was very bad condition. They had to do it the old-fashioned way and cut him, and he had a drainage tube, and uh, it was something. And then on the 15th, um, they had surgery scheduled again because they had found out that there were gallstones in his liver also. Um, Ricky had finally got to go home. He got his staples out eventually, and he was feeling a little better. But things changed on the 24th. I ended up hanging out on a Saturday night in the hospital. Ricky was in so much pain, and I had to threaten him to go to the hospital. I told him that if he died on me from something preventable, that I was going to dig him back up and kill him myself. So he went. Um, but his heart rate when they hooked him up was 39. And they were more concerned about his heart again. Um, they were also going to look at whether um, he had the surgery to make sure that there were no extra stones anywhere since he was in so much pain still. And so, he was admitted to UMC, and they were watching him and if to try to determine if they were going to give him a pacemaker because they said he had a leaky heart valve. On Valentine's Day, I had to call an ambulance for Ricky. His blood pressure was 99 over 45, and his heartbeat was 35. And that was the highest it had been that day. 4 days later, I was sitting in the waiting room, watching time slowly tick by. That was a melody that just went over and over into my head, you know. While we were going through that, our friend Michelle died. She was way sicker than me, and she had a problem with blood clots, and she had one in her thigh that came and went. In this time, they could not get it to break up. We had became close friends because we were both in the hospital so much. We used to tease that we were playing tag. When she would go out, it's like I would be going in. This was the time when I was going in and out the hospital like every 3 weeks because of my heart and Prince Meadows angina. Michelle's funeral was on the 27th, and I went. We went to DC's fight party for the Mayweather Pacquiao on May 2nd, despite the fact that Ricky was not feeling good and looked bad. He was back in the hospital the next day for severe abdominal pain, vomiting, and not keeping anything in. On the morning of May 5th, we got the initial news that Ricky was going to die, even though he had stage 4 stomach cancer, which they had found out. They did not believe his heart was going to last much longer. Later that afternoon, while I was visiting Ricky in the hospital, I had just come back from getting something to eat from the cafeteria and was sitting by his bed when the nurse asked me if I was okay. The next thing I remember was coming to. Later that night, they told me I'd had another stroke, followed by a seizure, and was in the ICU down the hall from Ricky. Ricky got discharged the morning of the 9th, while I spent 2 hours with the MRI machine. On May 19th, Ricky is so devastated with his own health diagnosis that he told me, as he took me to my doctor's appointment, to go on with your own life and start over. My job is done. Do not hate God because He is sending you someone better than me. I laughed and told him his medication had him delusional and I would see him after my doctor's appointment. He replied, "Promise me." As I hopped out, I said, "I promise. See you tonight." An hour later, while I was in my doctor's office, he did not like my vitals and asked what was going on. So I explained what was happening, and his solution was to send me down the hall to the hospital so they could monitor my heart and blood pressure. The ER doctor asked some more questions and said he was going to give me a Valium so I could relax because he felt I was on the verge of having a nervous breakdown. I agreed. I woke up the next day admitted to Desert Parkway Behavioral Hospital on a 72-hour hold. I tried to explain that I needed to go, that Ricky needed me. They told me the only way I was getting out was by a judge after 72 hours. I had to wait 24 hours before I had phone privileges. I stayed in my room until then. I called Ricky on the 21st of May and got no answer. I called Buddy, my sponsor, and left him a message to have Ricky call me that there has been some kind of mistake and to let him know where I was. The next day, Buddy came to see me at the evening visitation time. He told me Ricky had been admitted to a hospice and did not have much time left. His dying wish, sweetheart, is for you to go on with your life without seeing him. He does not want you to have this memory of him. And I remember looking at him, Buddy, and saying, "He's not going to die, Buddy. We have plans. We are planning a wedding. We are just having a setback. Everyone has said I was going to die too. The last 2 years, they've been saying I was going to die. I'm still here. God can heal him." And Buddy looked at me and said, "Baby girl, I know this is hard. Ricky said he made you make him a promise to the last thing he said to you. He wants you to hold on to that. Do you remember what he said to you?" I quietly replied, "Yes." But he brought me some clothes and other items the next day. The Bible Ricky had gave me this past Christmas, a big book, and a journal. On the 27th, I got the call that Ricky passed. For the first month after, I had several dear friends that paid for me to stay in a hotel or their place. I ended up homeless for 3 months. 5 of those weeks actually on the street. I lost 98% of my possessions due to the fact that the person Ricky told me he gave money to pay the storage where he had put the stuff didn't pay it. God removed a lot of so-called friends and people from my life. I was pissed as hell at God, but I kept walking. My kidneys failed. The doctors told me I had a severe back problems, nerve damage in my hands. My nervous disorder I was born with was worse, and due to the last brain MRI and spinal tap, they also suspected early stages of MS. Yet, my phone mysteriously stayed on. Never got a bill or a text for a payment request. I never went without at least one meal a day. I would somehow be at the front of a waiting list that I didn't sign up for. The real friends I still had, most in other states, sent me prayers, texts, care packages, pocket money, and hope. God multiplied my friends threefold, and I kept walking. My last homeless week was at the same mission Ricky had got sober, and every evening at 7 p.m., I had to sit in the same chapel his memorial service was held. God sent an angel whose whole family took me in, and she's known as Mama Pat. She had seen me several times at different jam sessions Ricky and I would go to. So when she saw me sitting outside the mission, God told her to take me home with her. It took 2 days of her coming back to find me around the mission area for her to convince me. But when she described Ricky to me to prove she had seen us at places like the Cellar and Joey's Tavern, I knew she was sent by God. She never asked for anything. She took me to my appointments, bought anything I needed. She cooked for me and wouldn't let me clean, bought me clothes and got me back into doing my crafts. On October 13th, Elise and my sis, Nicole, passed from congestive heart failure. In November, Ricky's sister, Gloria, passed. She had been diagnosed with stage 3 cervical cancer, which had spread to her lungs. Mama Pat's brother passed from his heart. He was such a kind soul. He was so funny. And even though I knew him for a short time, he made me feel like I was part of the family. In May of 2016, my big brother Philip passed. He wasn't my real brother. He was my AA brother. I will never forget the time he came to see me in the hospital. And he said, there was a dead body on the elevator with us. The look on his face was priceless. There are so many more memories from over the 20 years I knew him. When I grew up, I wanted to be just like him. Genuine, happy, loving, kind, and he accepted people just the way they were. He went in for a simple surgery and didn't come out. That December, In 2016, Papa C.J. Jones, one of the old timers from my AA meeting that I'd known for a long time, passed. My favorite saying from him was, "If you are not having fun, I don't know what you're waiting for." My friend Ruth, she turned 90 in April of 2021, and we helped her family move her into an assisted living. I was just starting to adjust to her not being around. She used to be my next door neighbor, and she was my best female friend. She had made herself my mother once she learned of some of my childhood. I got the call that she passed away on November 6th, 2021, and my world slammed into a brick wall. I had no idea how much she meant to me. It was not just her death. I knew it was coming. It was the fact that all my closest friends that had died between 2013 and 2015 that I had never got a chance to grieve for. Now, 6.5 years later, I was not prepared for the onslaught of emotions I had never experienced before. I got more mad at God. Why, God? Why have so many people that I care about die? Why has my life seemed like one disaster after another, one loss after another? Nobody should need this much experience. I am tired. I am through. Either you prove yourself to me now or I walk away. Not realizing that tears were running down my face for the first time in years. I then proceeded to tell God what He had to do to prove that He was real. I dared God to prove Himself to me. I do not recommend this method. Do not do this method. In December 2021, my friend Tommy passed from his heart. He had had open heart surgery earlier. I had known him since 1999 when I was really good friends with his ex. God did prove Himself to me. That will be in an upcoming video in a few months. On December 25th, I wholeheartedly gave my life to Christ. Not just because someone had told me to. Do you have any idea how many times I have said the so-called sinner's prayer with someone just to get them off my back? Me neither. It seemed like somebody was always trying to save me. Yes, and for a brief moment, the enemy tried that line. How do you know you're really mean at this time? I didn't even need to wonder about it because I just knew God had forgiven me. I found out that my second husband, Robert, passed in August of 2022. When I moved to Las Vegas in 1999, Buddy became my sponsor after I saw him speak at a meeting. He ran the late lunch brunch meeting. I went on any day I was not working. We had a lot of long conversations before the meeting. I remember when I had first asked him to be my sponsor, a lot of people that had knew that my other two sponsors had died started teasing Buddy and saying, "Don't do it, Buddy, you may die." and that was my first experience with someone using that against me, you know. But he became my sponsor, and he was always there for me. On May 13th, 2022, I got a message from my friend Eddie P saying that Buddy is not doing well at all. He's struggling with severe dementia, and he's been in a few different facilities that couldn't handle his behavior, and he was currently at Sunrise. So on May 15th, my husband and I went to see Buddy. He did recognize me for a little while, and he let me pray with him before slipping back out of reality. He was so confused and lost. But when I removed my mask, his face lit up with the biggest smile. And for about 6 minutes, he was able to hold a conversation. He believed that CJ had came to see him right before I had got there, and that his fingernails were claws since they were longer than he was used to. I didn't have any nail clippers on me. He was not sure where he slept last night. And when I had told him right here, he reminded me of a child learning something for the very first time. It was so heartbreaking. And on December 10th, Buddy passed. In 2023, I found out about my mother's deathbed confession. In 2001, she told a more heartbreaking story that still shocks me today because she made a memory from my past have an answer. She claimed that my birth mother, who was Kathy, who she knew, was beaten to death by her husband when I was a baby, and that Mrs. Green, the house I lived in until age 5, was the lady that used to watch me for her. But that is a story for another video. It would explain why I would be forced to look into a casket, and explains away all the hush hush talks that I would walk into when Joyce and her stepfather would be talking. And it would explain why her stepfather, Uncle Walter, would always say I looked like Kathy. Mike Crow was the MVP of my husband's friendship league. He was his best friend. He was a first round draft pick in the draft of life. On May 2nd, 2024, after a tough skirmish with ALS, Mike hung up his skates and laid down his helmet, but not without leaving a highlight reel of memories that could fill a stadium. He had a smile that could outshine the floodlights at a night game, and a laugh that echoed like a country song on a long drive home. Mike was to humor what football is to Thanksgiving, a downright tradition. The last words Mike shared were as memorable as a game winning touchdown or a walk off home run. He said, "Cheryl, I believe." And George made a good choice. Mike, we believe, gave his life to Christ before he died. Today, I no longer think that death follows me. I don't know why so many people in my life died. I believe they were put there for me because they all played a very special role. I don't know what's going to come, but Jesus has blessed me beyond my wildest dreams. I don't know what the future holds, But I pray every day that I can see people like Jesus, that I can hear people like Jesus, that I can speak to people like Jesus, and that I treat people like Jesus. I ask God every day to allow me to be a walking example of Him and that they can see God through me. This is just part of my testimony. There's just so many parts. I never know which direction God is going to take things when I open my mouth. But I try to do everything for His glory. And for some reason, He chose me. I don't know why. But I am so grateful that He found compassion to offer me many chances at life. I have no idea how many times I tried to take my own life. I stopped counting around 10. I've been hospitalized over 55 times. I've had over 5 heart attacks, 2 seizures, 2 strokes. I've been paralyzed. I've had 4 back surgeries. I've had my lung collapse 3 times. I've had to have appendix surgery that would have busted if I would have went to work instead of going to the hospital. I shouldn't be here. But God, for some reason, saw fit for me. And I look forward to where we go. Have a blessed day. Jesus loves you.